Close your eyes now and imagine yourself on a quiet morning along the coast of Anglo-Saxon England, sometime in the 9th century. The air is heavy with the familiar sense of hearth smoke, unwashed wool, and the refuse of crowded medieval streets. Then on the horizon, strange shapes emerge. Long, elegant ships with carved dragon heads gliding silently across the misty waters. The men who disembark are not what you expected. Their hair gleams in the pale sun, carefully combed and oiled. Their beards are neat, their fingernails clean, their tunics free of stains or sweat. In a world where most struggle to wash their faces once a week, these men seem otherworldly, suspiciously clean. And so we ask ourselves, why did the Vikings' hygiene so shock the people of medieval Europe? What did these Northmen know about cleanliness that we have forgotten? And how did their habits, so simple, so natural, help them charm, conquer, and change the world they encountered? Tonight, let us journey gently back into that time. Let the distant sound of waves and the whisper of wind in the rigging carry you across the centuries as we uncover the secrets of Viking cleanliness. Secrets that might even help us in our restless modern age rediscover a little peace and dignity at the end of the day. Picture a small English village on a damp autumn day. Mud cakes the lanes where pigs root and chickens scatter. Inside the wooden church, the priest frets over the growing threat from the north, not just of swords and axes, but of something stranger. As he writes in his chronicle by flickering candlelight, he describes men who are too clean, for that is how many in medieval Europe saw the Vikings. Foreign raiders, yes, but raiders who comb their hair daily, who wash their faces and hands, who change their clothes more often than seem decent to some. We know from writers like John of Wallingford, a 13th century English chronicler, that Viking cleanliness bewildered and unsettled their neighbors. John complained that the Vikings took care to bathe and groom themselves, to keep their hair combed and their nails clipped, not out of virtue, but in his eyes, to seduce respectable English women. He accused them of using their cleanliness as a weapon, as dangerous as any sword or spear. Imagine, if you will, the contrast. The average Anglo-Saxon peasant, noble, or monk bathed rarely, perhaps once a year, or if fortunate, a few times more. Washing the face and hands might occur daily, but full immersion in water was uncommon. Clothes were not changed often, partly because of the labor involved in washing them, and partly because of different standards of what was considered clean or necessary. And then came the Vikings. Men who, even while on campaign, found ways to wash their faces, comb their hair, and tend their beards. Men who seemed to carry the crisp air of the northern fjords with them, unsettling those who saw in such habits something almost magical, or perhaps dangerously persuasive. Why did this bother medieval chroniclers so much? In part, it was cultural. In a world where Christian asceticism often praised the denial of bodily comfort, including the comforts of washing and grooming, Viking habits seemed worldly, even vain. Cleanliness in the eyes of some monks could signal pride, and pride was the gateway to sin. But there was more. The Vikings' attention to hygiene gave them quite simply an advantage in trade, where a well-kept appearance inspired trust, an advantage in diplomacy, where their neatness set them apart from other warriors, and yes, an advantage in personal relationships, where their cleanliness and care for appearance attracted admiration, and sometimes envy and resentment. Consider for a moment what it must have been like for a local woman to meet a Viking trader or warrior. While the men of her own village might be crusted with the grime of weeks or months without washing, here stood a man whose hair smelled of clean water and wood smoke, whose nails bore no dirt beneath them, whose garments were brushed free of dust. It is no wonder that chroniclers like John of Wallingford felt compelled to warn of these dangerous foreigners who knew the power of soap and water. As we continue our journey, we will see that Viking cleanliness was not mere vanity. It was a reflection of deeply ingrained cultural values, of respect for oneself and one's community. And it was supported by practices, bathing, grooming, laundering, that were, in many ways, far ahead of their time. So as you drift deeper into this exploration, let your mind's eye picture those early encounters. The surprise, the suspicion, the grudging admiration. And imagine too the quiet pride of the Viking who, after a long voyage, took the time to rinse salt from his beard, to comb the sea tangles from his hair, to emerge from his ship not only as a warrior, but as a man who respected himself enough to be clean. And as the firelight fades from that English village, and we prepare to journey next into the heart of Viking bathing traditions, let your breath slow, your thoughts soften, for the tale of the Lagerdag, the Saturday bath, awaits. A story of warmth, of steam, of community. A story that might just change how we think of those who came from the cold north, bringing with them not only the clash of steel, but the quiet power of soap and water. Let your mind's eye drift now to a different scene, far from the muddy streets of medieval England. Imagine instead a settlement along a quiet fjord where the water mirrors the pale sky and pine forests stretch like sentinels along the shore. Smoke rises gently from a cluster of wooden buildings, and at the heart of this small community stands a curious structure, a bathhouse. Its walls are thick with turf and timber, its roof low to keep in the heat. And within, the air hums softly with the sound of water heating over stones, with the crackle of the fire beneath the bath kettle, with the low voices of those preparing for the weekly ritual of cleansing. This was Laugerdag, literally bath day, the day of the week when Viking families, from humble farmers to powerful jarls, set aside time to bathe. It is no accident that Laugerdag survives in modern Scandinavian languages as the word for Saturday. The bath was not a rare indulgence or an emergency measure against dirt, as it might have been in much of medieval Europe. It was woven into the very rhythm of life. Picture the bathhouse, small, perhaps only a single room, but warm and welcoming. Inside, stones heated in the hearth glowed red as they were lifted, one by one, with tongs or stout sticks, and placed into a stone-lined pit or beneath a water kettle. The steam rose slowly at first, then more thickly, filling the room with comforting warmth. The scent of wood smoke mingled with the sharp freshness of juniper or birch branches laid on the stones to release their cleansing fragrance. Men and women bathed separately or at different times of the day, respecting modesty but sharing the same commitment to cleanliness. Children splashed happily at the edges of the bath space, while elders took their ease, letting warmth seep into tired bones. The experience was not merely physical, but communal, a time for storytelling, for quiet talk, for easing tensions after a week of labor. Unlike the great Roman baths of an earlier age, Viking bathhouses were simple, intimate places, but they served the same purpose: to soothe the body, to refresh the spirit, to restore dignity through the act of washing. And they were surprisingly common. Excavations at settlements like Hedeby, Birka, and Jorvik have revealed the remains of such bath structures: stone-lined pits, charred hearths, fragments of ladles and water vessels, all speaking of a tradition as natural to the Norse as the changing of the seasons. And so we may ask, how did this habit arise in lands so often seen as harsh and cold? The answer lies in the closeness of the Vikings to nature. Water was everywhere, in the rivers and lakes, the fjords and streams. To bathe was to honor the gifts of the one, to keep the body in harmony with the elements. The sagas tell us that heroes and kings took pride in their cleanliness, that warriors might pause, even during campaigns, to bathe in a river or wash in a stream. The act of bathing was as much about self-respect as it was about hygiene. Consider the winter months, when the cold might have discouraged lesser folk. Yet even then, the bathhouse offered refuge. The stones retained their heat, the steam warded off the chill. Snowmelt or water from ice-fed streams could be heated and poured for washing, and birch whisks helped stimulate the skin and drive out the weariness of long nights. Now imagine the quiet after a bath. A Viking man, his skin still glowing from the steam, stepping out into the cold night air, clean, refreshed, ready to face the world with renewed strength. A woman braiding her still damp hair by firelight, feeling the calm that follows the cleansing of the body. The bathhouse, now cooling, its stones pale in the moonlight, waiting for next week's ritual to begin anew. To their neighbors in medieval Europe, people who might bathe only a few times a year, if that, such habits seem not only strange but suspect. A people who bathe so often, who kept their hair and nails trimmed, who wore clean clothes, must be, in the eyes of some, vain or decadent. Yet for the Vikings, it was nothing of the sort. It was simply how a person should live, in respect for oneself, for one's kin, for the guys who had given the body as a gift. And what of those who could not reach a bathhouse? The sailors at sea, the traders far from home. As we will see in the quiet chapters ahead, the Vikings found ways to maintain their standards even in the most challenging conditions. But for now, let us linger a little longer beside that warm bathhouse, where steam curls upward into the night and the voices of friends and kin fade into a gentle hush. Feel, if you will, the warmth of the stones, the softness of the birch branches, the soothing embrace of clean water. And as you rest here in your mind's eye, prepare to join us next in exploring the tools of Viking grooming, the combs, the ear spoons, the tweezers, small things that spoke of great care. Now, as the bathhouse fades into the quiet mist of memory, let us step closer and peer into the everyday life of the Vikings, not through their ships or swords, but through the small, humble objects they carried at their belts, kept in pouches, or buried with them for the long journey beyond. These were the tools of personal care: delicate combs, slender ear spoons, and fine tweezers, tokens of a culture that prized neatness as much as strength. Picture a Viking warrior, tall and broad, his hair shining in the pale morning sun. His beard is trimmed, his mustache neat, his fingernails clean despite days at sea. How did he achieve this, you wonder, in an age we so often think of as rough and unwashed? The answer lies in those small, often overlooked treasures unearthed by archaeologists across the Viking world. Comb after comb, carved from antler, bone, or wood, emerges from the soil of ancient graves and forgotten settlements. Some are simple, sturdy pieces, practical tools for untangling hair after the sea wind has played its tricks. Others are ornately decorated with interlaced patterns, runes, or animal motifs, a testament to both the craftsman's skill and the owner's pride in appearance. Imagine for a moment the care taken to carve these combs, the fine teeth shaped with patient precision, the handles smooth to fit comfortably in the hand. In settlements like Birka, Hedeby, and Jorvik, entire workshops have been found where such combs were made, suggesting not only their ubiquity but their value. In a world where a single comb might last a lifetime, this was no disposable trinket. It was part of one's identity. But the Viking grooming kit did not stop at combs. Delicate ear spoons, small, slender implements with graceful curves, were used to clean the ears, a detail of hygiene often forgotten by their less fastidious contemporaries. Tweezers, too, fashioned out of bronze or iron, allowed the careful plucking of stray hairs. These tools were not hidden away in chests or closets. They were worn proudly, often suspended from belts or carried in small leather pouches, ready at hand when needed. Consider the words of an Anglo-Saxon chronicler who noted with no small measure of alarm how these foreigners, with their well-combed hair and clean nails, seemed to charm the women of England. Was it magic, he wondered, or merely the unsettling power of cleanliness in an age where grime was the norm? There is something deeply human in this attention to grooming. It speaks not of vanity, but of dignity, of a desire to present oneself well to others, whether in the hall of a chieftain or on the deck of a ship, to comb one's hair, to clean one's nails, to ensure that no detail of appearance was neglected. These were small acts, but they mattered. They told the world that here stood a man or a woman who respected themselves and those they met. Let your mind linger now on the scene of a young Viking preparing for the day. He sits by the hearth, the first light of dawn glinting on the polished bone of his comb. With slow, steady strokes, he untangles the night's sleep from his hair, working patiently until each strand lies smooth. His sister nearby uses her own comb, carefully dividing and braiding her hair with practiced ease. A father shows his son how to use a tiny ear spoon. A mother teaches her daughter the proper way to oil a comb with animal fat to keep it supple and effective. These are quiet moments, tender and unhurried. And they remind us that for all the tales of raids and battles, the Vikings were also people who understood the power of small daily rituals to bind a family, a community, a culture together. Even in death, these tools followed their owners. Viking graves across Scandinavia and beyond have yielded grooming kits placed lovingly beside the departed, as essential for the journey to the afterlife as weapons or jewelry. A comb, an ear spoon, a pair of tweezers, small comforts, reminders of home, of care, of the simple dignity of being clean. And so, as we pause at this point in our journey, let the image of those combs and tools rest gently in your thoughts. Let the quiet rhythm of daily grooming, the soft scrape of the comb's teeth, the delicate work of the tweezers, the cool touch of bone or bronze in the hand, soothe you, for in these small acts, the Vikings found a way to bring order and grace to even the roughest of days. Ahead lies another chapter of their story, the secrets of scent and fresh clothing, of herbs and laundry, of how the Vikings clothed themselves not only in furs and linen, but in the subtle perfumes of nature. And as we prepare to step softly into that part of the tale, let your mind settle, your breath deepen, and your curiosity linger. The wardrobe of freshness awaits. Now let us drift onward through the quiet world of Viking cleanliness, beyond the steam of the bathhouse, beyond the careful strokes of combs and ear spoons, into the realm of scent, of linen washed clean in cold streams, of herbs crushed gently between calloused fingers, of clothing that carried the fresh breath of the northern forests. In this chapter of their story, the Vikings reveal yet another secret, how they clothed not just their bodies, but their very presence, in freshness that lingered softly in the air. Picture a Viking longhouse at dawn. A woman stoops beside a wooden tub, her hands red from the chill of the stream, scrubbing linen with lye soap she made from ash and animal fat. The soap's earthy tang mingles with the clean, sharp scent of the water. She beats the cloth on smooth stones at the river's edge, then drapes it across a wooden rack, where the breeze will dry it and the sun, weak though it may be, will lend its purity. This was no chore to be delayed or neglected. Clean clothing mattered deeply, as much a part of daily honor as a well-kept weapon or a faithful heart. Archaeologists, brushing away the soil of ancient settlements, have found the simple tools of this craft: bone pins for hanging clothes, wooden paddles for beating fabric, fragments of wool and linen that bear the marks of washing and careful tending. The sagas, too, hint at this pride. A man who wore soiled garments was no better, they suggest, than one who let his sword rust in its scabbard. Clean clothes were the outer sign of inner worth. But cleanliness for the Vikings did not stop with the washtub. They knew, too, the power of scent. In the forests and meadows around their homes, they gathered herbs and plants that lent their freshness to garments and hair. Sweet gale, juniper, meadowsweet, names that today seem almost forgotten, but in Viking times were familiar friends. Juniper branches might be laid in the chest where wool tunics were stored, keeping moths at bay and leaving behind a woodsy fragrance. Meadowsweet could be tucked into the folds of linen, its scent released as the cloth moved. Sweet gale, with its spicy, resinous aroma, was prized for both its perfume and its ability to repel insects. And then there were the oils, simple natural preparations made from animal fat or pressed from seeds, into which herbs had been steeped. A few drops might be smoothed through the hair, taming the wind's mischief and leaving behind a hint of the wildflowers or evergreens from which it was made. Imagine, if you will, a Viking trader stepping onto a foreign shore. His tunic clean, his hair gleaming with oil, his very scent carrying with it the memory of his northern home. Subtle but unmistakable. In a world where few could afford such care, these small acts set the Vikings apart. To the people of medieval Europe, their cleanliness and fragrance were as striking as their weapons. Chroniclers wrote, sometimes with admiration, often with suspicion, of men who washed their clothes, who combed their hair, who smelled of herbs rather than sweat and smoke. Some saw in this a kind of sorcery. Others saw only a reminder of what was possible, if one cared enough to make the effort. And so we can pause here at the river's edge and let the scene settle softly in our thoughts. The gentle slap of cloth on stone, the rustle of herbs gathered in the meadow, the quiet pride of a man or woman who dresses not in splendor or wealth, but in simple, clean garments that speak of self-respect. In these small details, we glimpse the heart of a culture that understood To be clean was to honor not just oneself, but one's gods, one's kin, and the world itself. Beyond this lies yet another chapter in our journey, how the Vikings managed to stay fresh even at sea, where salt and wind and cramped quarters might have defeated lesser folk. But for now, let your thoughts linger on the soft scent of juniper, the clean breath of linen drying in the wind, the quiet dignity of those who took the time to care. Breathe in that imagined freshness, and as you do, feel your own spirit ease, your own mind quiet, your own curiosity rest gently, ready for what comes next. Let your mind sail now, quietly and gently, away from the shore. The land fades behind us, the forest softening into a green blur, the mountains becoming shadows on the horizon. Before us stretches the open sea, vast, silver under a pale northern sun, the waves whispering against the hull of a longship. Here begins one of the most remarkable chapters of the Viking story. How these seafarers, far from the comfort of hearth and bathhouse, found ways to remain clean and dignified, even as the salt wind bit at their skin and the sea spray soaked their clothes. Picture a longship at dawn, after a night spent drifting beneath the stars. The crew stirs slowly. Men rise from their resting places along the deck, where they have slept wrapped in cloaks, their bodies curved to the shape of the planks. The air is sharp and bracing, filled with the scents of salt, wood tar, and damp wool. But even here, far from home, the Vikings begin their day with small rituals of care that connect them to the land they have left behind. A man reaches for his comb, a simple piece of carved antler that he keeps tucked safely in his belt pouch. He runs it through his hair, working out the tangles the wind has left. Another draws water in a wooden cup, dips his fingers in, and splashes it over his face, washing away the salt crust that the sea has left during the night. A third, more meticulous perhaps, uses a bit of soft cloth to clean the corners of his eyes and the edges of his mouth. And always the combs are passed among friends, shared as readily as bread or drink, a small gesture of fellowship that strengthens the bonds between shipmates. How did they manage it, you might wonder, in a world where water was precious, where space was limited, where the sea itself seemed to conspire against cleanliness? The answer lies in their ingenuity and in their deep respect for order and dignity, even in the most challenging conditions. First, consider the water. Every Viking ship set out with casks of fresh water, carefully rationed for drinking and cooking. But they also knows how to use the sea itself. Salt water, though harsh on the skin, could be used to rinse the face, the hands, even the hair. Afterward, a bit of oil, rendered from animal fat and infused with herbs brought from home, could be smoothed over the skin to protect it from the chafing and dryness. The oil lent a subtle fragrance as well, a reminder of the forests and meadows left behind. Then there were the clothes. Vikings wore layers of wool and linen, materials that breathed and resisted dirt better than many modern fabrics. When possible, garments were rinsed in fresh water at river mouths or in coastal streams, wrung out and left to dry in the sun and wind. On longer voyages, sailors might take turns washing small items during brief landings, knowing that even a few hours ashore could refresh both body and spirit. The sagas tell of warriors who, after days at sea, made it their first task upon landing to wash, comb their hair, and change their tunics before meeting with foreign chiefs or entering new settlements. Cleanliness was part of their greeting, a silent message that said, "We come not as wild beasts, but as men of honor." Even aboard ship, small tools of cleanliness remained within reach. Tweezers and ear spoons hung from belts or rested in pouches. Strips of soft wool might be used to clean the teeth or polish a blade, for the Vikings saw no shame in tending both their weapons and their bodies with equal care. The comb, above all, was a constant companion. Some ships' finds, like those from the Oseberg burial, have yielded combs carved with delicate patterns, proof that even on the move, even in death, the Vikings valued this simple tool of dignity. But the challenge of staying clean at sea was not merely physical, it was also psychological. Imagine the comfort after days of wet and cold, of running a comb through tangled hair, of washing one's hands and face with fresh or salt water, of changing into a dry tunic, even if it smelled faintly of smoke and tar. These small acts restored a sense of self, of humanity, that the sea might otherwise have worn away. They reminded the Vikings of who they were and of the homes to which they hoped to return. And consider, too, the scent of their ships. We might imagine wrongly that a longship would stink of unwashed bodies and rotting provisions. But the Vikings were skilled in masking and managing odors. They lined their ships with herbs and fresh-cut greenery where possible, and smeared wood with tar that lent a clean, sharp scent. Nets of juniper branches might hang from the mast, drying in the wind, their fragrance mingling with that of the sea. When they camped ashore, they gathered sweet-smelling plants to lay beneath sleeping mats or scatter across the deck. These scents were more than pleasant. They were practical, helping to deter insects and refresh the spirit. One might also think of the communal nature of shipboard life. With so many men packed close together, there was little room for carelessness. A man who neglected himself risked not only his own discomfort, but that of his fellows. And so, through shared expectation and quiet encouragement, the crew maintained standards that would surprise those who imagined the Vikings as merely wild seafarers. When storms came and the sea rose up in anger, these routines became even more precious. A lull in the tempest might see men washing salt from their eyes, wiping down weapons to guard against rust, checking their boots and cloaks for signs of wear. Each act of care was a defiance of chaos, a declaration that even here, at the edge of the world, the Vikings would not let themselves be undone. Let us pause now and imagine such a moment. The storm has passed, the sea lies calm and shining beneath a clearing sky. The crew moves quietly about the ship, tending to the damage, but also to themselves. A man sits at the prow, his hair damp but clean, the tangles combed out, his face turned toward the wind. Another rinses a small cloth in seawater and scrubs at a patch of dried blood on his arm. Not from battle, but from the hard work of rowing and bailing. A third lifts a tunic from where it has dried on the mast, shaking it out and pulling it over his head with a sigh of relief. Small things, perhaps, but in these small things lies the heart of Viking resilience. And when they reached land at last, how did they present themselves? Not as ragged castaways, but as men restored. The first task, as the keel touched the shore, was to wash, in river or stream, in lake or spring, to change into clean garments, to oil the hair, to fasten the brooch at the throat, to ensure that boots were clean and weapons bright. In this way, they met the world with dignity, no matter how long or hard the voyage had been. So let your thoughts rest now on that quiet deck, the sea hushed around it, the crew moving with care and purpose. Feel the salt breeze on your skin, the warmth of the sun after the storm, the soothing rhythm of small acts of cleanliness that restore body and spirit alike. And as we drift toward the final part of our tale, the deeper meaning of Viking cleanliness and how it shaped their dealings with friend and foe, let your breath slow, your mind settle, and your curiosity linger softly, ready for what comes next. Let the waves of our story carry you now to gentler shores, not of wood, water, and tools, but of something more elusive, the quiet power of appearance, of dignity, of the impression one leaves in the hearts and minds of others. For in the Viking world, cleanliness was not merely about hygiene. It was a language spoken silently through combed hair, fresh clothing, and the scent of herbs. It was a way of saying, I am worthy of respect. And this language shaped not just how Vikings saw themselves, but how they conquered, traded, and built bonds in lands far from home. Picture, if you will, a small coastal village in the British Isles, perhaps along a quiet river where reeds sway and the morning mist rises from the water. The people of the village are used to hard living. Their clothes are simple, often patched and stained. Bathing, when it happens at all, is a cold and uncomfortable chore, done quickly in chilly streams. Life is survival, and appearances are a luxury few can afford. Then one day, longships appear on the river's bend, their prows carved like beasts from old stories. The villagers watch in fear, expecting the worst. The clash of steel, the torching of homes. But what they see next gives them pause. The men who step ashore are not the wild savages of rumor. Their hair is neat, gleaming with oil or water. Their faces are clean, their tunics free of grime. They smell not of rot or sweat, but faintly of pine, juniper, or the sea itself. What must the villagers have thought? Perhaps surprise, perhaps confusion, perhaps even a flicker of admiration, however reluctant. These were men of strength, yes, but also of self-control. Men who valued order, who took care not only with their weapons, but with themselves. And in that first impression, before a word was spoken, the Vikings had already won an advantage. Cleanliness was, in this way, a kind of silent diplomacy. In a world where filth and disorder were common, to be clean was to stand apart, to say, we are different, we are disciplined, we are to be taken seriously. It helped in trade, where merchants might trust a man who looked after himself to look after agreements and promises as well. It helped in alliances, where chieftains and kings might see in these tidy warriors a reflection of their own desire for strength and order. But the power of Viking cleanliness reached beyond first impressions. It shaped the relationships they built in the lands they touched. Consider the many places where Vikings settled: in Ireland, in England, in Normandy, in the lands of the Rus. In each, they did not remain forever outsiders. They married, they traded, they governed. And part of what made this blending possible was their ability to impress and charm, to show through their habits that they were not merely raiders, but potential neighbors, partners, rulers. Let us think, too, of the personal level, of how hygiene supported not just diplomacy or trade, but the everyday bonds of human life. The chroniclers of the time, often with grudging honesty, recorded how Viking men seemed to win the affection of local women, not through brute force, but through cleanliness and charm. In an age when most men smelled of unwashed wool and stale ale, a man who smelled of soap, salt air, and sweet herbs was remarkable indeed. It is said that Viking men combed their hair daily, not merely for themselves, but to honor those they wished to please. A small act, perhaps, but one that spoke volumes. Even within Viking society, cleanliness played a role in shaping identity and honor. A warrior who neglected his appearance risked more than looking foolish. He risked shame. The sagas tell of insults traded not over wealth or strength, but over dirtiness or slovenly habits. To call a man unwashed or unkempt was to challenge his worth. And so the comb at the belt, the clean tunic on the back, the oiled hair beneath the helmet were not vanities. They were badges of pride. Beyond the social, there was also the spiritual. The Vikings, in their beliefs, saw cleanliness as connected to respect for the woes and for fate. To greet the day clean was to honor Odin, Thor, and Freya, to show readiness for whatever the Norns had woven into one's path. Before a feast, a battle, or a journey, washing and grooming were as much ritual as preparation. Cleanliness cleared not only the body but the mind, allowing one to face life with clarity and courage. And what of the psychological power of these habits? Imagine life at sea or in a longhouse through the dark of winter or on a campaign far from home. In such times, small acts of care, combing the hair, washing the face, changing into clean clothes, provided comfort. They reminded a man or woman of home, of normalcy, of who they were beneath the hardships of the moment. They strengthened morale, binding crew or household together in shared routines that said, "We endure and we do so with dignity." There is something deeply human in this, is there not? We too know the power of such rituals, how even in our busiest or hardest days, the simple acts of brushing hair, washing hands, or changing into fresh clothes can lift the spirit. The Vikings, so often seen as fierce and wild, understood this truth intimately. Their cleanliness was not just about the body, it was about the soul. As you let this reflection settle, imagine now a longship at rest on a quiet shore. The crew gathers around a fire, their garments drying in the evening breeze, the faint scent of smoke and juniper in the air. They have washed in the river, combed the salt from their hair, cleaned their weapons and tools. They sit together at ease, knowing that tomorrow may bring challenges. But tonight they are whole, clean, and ready. The stars rise above them, the sea sighs softly at their feet, and the world feels for a moment in balance. And so, the legacy of Viking cleanliness lingers still. In the places they settled, their habits influenced local customs. In the stories told of them, their care for appearance tempered the image of the savage raider. In their own hearts, it helped sustain their strength, their resilience, their ability to face the unknown with pride intact. Let your thoughts rest on this gentle truth, that even in times of hardship, the small acts of care we offer ourselves and each other matter deeply. The Vikings remind us that cleanliness is not a mere chore, but a quiet strength, a gift we give ourselves, a way of saying, I endure, I respect, I am ready. And as we prepare to leave this journey, to let the long ships drift back into the mist of time, let the lesson linger softly. That dignity begins with the simple grace of caring for oneself, no matter where the winds may carry us. And so, dear traveler, as we let the long ships slip quietly back across the horizon, as the scent of juniper and sea breeze fades gently from our thoughts, we are left with a truth as soft and enduring as the whisper of waves on a northern shore. The Vikings, those fierce sailors of song and saga, were not only warriors and wanderers. They were keepers of dignity in the simplest of ways. Through clean hands, brushed hair, fresh linen, and the soft perfume of herbs carried from their forests and meadows. Their habits of cleanliness shaped how the world saw them. They won trust where others inspired suspicion. They forged bonds through silent messages of order and self-respect. And they remind us, even today, that in the small, quiet rituals of caring for ourselves, we claim a kind of strength that no storm or battle can take from us. So, as you drift into the peace of your own evening, let their example soothe and inspire you. Let the simple acts of care, a gentle wash, a comb through your hair, the donning of clean clothes, become your own shield against the chaos of the world. If this journey into the hidden side of Viking life has brought you a moment of calm, a spark of curiosity, or simply the comfort of a well-told tale, I invite you to join us on future voyages through history's quiet wonders. Please take a moment to like this video, share it with fellow seekers of peaceful stories, and subscribe so that together we may continue to sail the soft seas of the past. Until our next journey, may your nights be restful and your dreams touched by the wisdom of those who came before.